Hello everyone, this is Alex, and today we have a very interesting topic that is brought to me by some of you viewers. Are real instruments, real performers, always better for your productions than VST instruments? Whether you're scoring for film, for TV, or just adding some instrumental sounds to your music. Now, some of you might say, well, obviously, working with real performers is always better. Well, watch this video because I'm going to be presenting pros and cons for working with real performers, but also pros and cons with working with VST instruments. Because they both have cons, and it's important for you to know them in order to make the better choices for your productions. Now, this is a problem that every composer comes around, whether they're just starting out, but also as you get more and more gigs, you are wondering, well, I have a little more money. What should I invest in? Should I invest in a sample library? Should I put some money aside to hire real musicians for my next gig? Well, as a composer who went through all of these questionings and has been quite involved as an arranger, conductor, composer in film scoring in general, I think I can help you to understand a little bit more about everything that's involved into both choices. Now, in this video, I'll present the pros and cons of each of these options, and afterwards, I'll give you a few different guidelines to use on every project so that you can make the right choices and the right investment for your productions and your music. But before we dive in, just take a little moment to subscribe, and if you have any questions, make sure you drop a comment in the section below. I'll be happy to answer your questions as best of my capabilities. So now let's go with a pros list of real instruments. Alright, so this is the obvious one. When you're working with real performers, you really get this unmatched expressivity and human nuance. So this humanization, you can't get better than that because you got humans, right? You'll say, well, this is obvious. Now the second one, natural blend and acoustic richness. When you record in a nice setting in the studio with great microphone placements, let's say you're recording a string quartet, you get this really nice blend already. You don't have to do major tweaks afterwards to bring all these four instruments together. You already have it in the room. So if the recording, the setting, the mic placements are good, it would be very easy for you to have this cohesive sound that's always very important in mixes. You can then place the other elements of your music around this very cohesive sound and have this great foundation to begin with. Another pros, you will have a much better expression in terms of dynamics, in terms of rubato, in terms of phrasing. Imagine you're working with real performers. Well, they've been working on their nuances and dynamics and expressive range for years. It's nothing compared to you programming sounds. You might never get quite as close as them in terms of expression. Whatever how many years you spend on just working with this little mod wheel and tweaking a few little things here in the velocity. So if you really want this very expressive sound, well, working with real performers is obviously a very good option. Now the next step is if you have soloist in your music. If you have a flute solo in your music, if you have a violin solo, everything that's solo, you will get much more personality when working with the real performer. Since the soloist is so much exposed, working with the real performer will make us hear every detail of what they're playing and will bring so much more personality to your music. Now the last thing is very important for us, and it's one of the main reasons that we invest in real performers, is that it adds a lot of prestige and credibility to your music. Even for producers who don't necessarily understand the difference between real and non-real instruments. They might hear VST instruments in a score and say, oh, okay. But when they hear a real performers right after that, they're like, wow, this sounds much better. And if used in the right way and blended well in your music, in that case, just including a soloist might give you the gig over somebody else who's just working with VST instruments. Now we get into the cons list, because yes, there is a cons list at working with real performers, and it's very important to understand them. The first one is quite obvious, it's expensive. Yes, real performers cost money, and especially if you hire professional musicians. And now I'm talking a lot about soloists, but if you want to work with string quartet, if you want to work with a string orchestra, it's like 16 times more expensive. And not only you have to pay for the performance, you have to pay for the rights also, so you can do whatever you can with their performance. But the other thing that's expensive is that you need a studio, you need an engineer, and if the studio doesn't provide all of the equipment that you need, you might need to rent some more microphones, for instance. And the bigger you get into doing a live sessions in terms of how many performers you have, the more hours you need to pay for the studio and the engineer, because it takes time before to place the microphones and it takes time afterwards also to take everything off. Now, another big point in my cons list that we don't really talk so much about is that there's a risk of inconsistencies in the performance. You might do 4 or 5 takes of a specific cue and say, oh, I think we got enough. And then the day after, when you listen to all of this, you realize there's this one measure that you never got right. And now you're stuck with it. There's nothing you can do. You cannot hide it. You cannot go back to the studio. You cannot do anything once it's there. Of course, there's certain types of edits that you can do, but that's another point on my cons list. It actually takes a lot of time to correct if you have a poor performance, or if something got wrong, somebody was not feeling well, the conductor was not a good choice, there's this one bass player that's always playing flat. Bad things can happen all the time, and it can really make your experience not so good. So in that case, you have no flexibility over the material once it's recorded. Another thing on my cons list is that it's really time consuming for you, the music producer, to schedule the recording, schedule the rehearsal if you have time to do a rehearsal, make sure that everything is booked, that you have all the equipment, that everybody knows where everybody's going, that to plan the scores, and if you have an arranger, to plan this with the arranger and have your team set up so that everything will be optimal. It takes a lot of time and energy, but is it worth it? It can be, but we'll see that after my pros and cons list of VST instruments. So VST instruments, orchestral libraries, everybody loves them. Well, not really everybody, but at least everybody can have access to them. This is my first pros. It's very accessible. It's very cost effective as well, because if you're investing in a recording, you're just going to end up with the music that you've composed for this specific film or series or song, but then you cannot use it for another project. As a VST library as well, if you invest a lot of money into a VST library for one project, then you can just reuse it for the next project as well, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. Some of my libraries, I invested into them 15 years ago, and I still use them in every project today. So that's a very cost-effective investment. And another pro in this list is that you have total control over the tempo, the key, the performance in general, just where everything lands. If it's a little bit too late, then you can listen to it and say, I like this a little bit earlier. And then you just move the note. It's as simple as that. And then the timings are great. And timings are so important, especially in film and TV scoring. So that's really something to think about. And other pros in this list for VST instruments, it has this very easy to do a mock-up and very easy to revise it afterwards. If you're working with a client that have no idea what you have in your mind, well, it's the quickest way to just show them what it might sound like in the end. And if you do it just well enough, you spend a little amount of time on this mock-up, then you present it to them, and if they give you a go, then you just go back to it and spend some more time making it sound even better. As opposed to if you're working with real instruments, sometimes you just say, well, I won't invest into good sample libraries, but then it's very hard to convince the client that they need to invest $10,000 for it to sound good in the end. Another pros list that's very specific to today, 2025, there's a lot of very credible and realistic sound libraries. They all have their personalities, and depending on what music that you're doing, what kind of feature that you want to present in your music, whether it is soloist, whether it is harp, whether it is like a huge piano sound that's fully processed, you don't necessarily need to hire pianist, to have a grand piano, to hire somebody to tune the piano, and then to have 5 microphones in your piano to get this sound. You can expect somebody to have already done that, and that put this online available to all for a very modest price. But it does take some research and some experimentation. I have 2 videos doing a full review of some sample libraries that I liked, but I also give you some links to videos that I've enjoyed watching recently that talks about VST libraries in 2025. Now onto the cons list of VST libraries. VST libraries have also this reputation of have a lack of nuance and expression. Every VST instrument have a certain threshold. After a certain point, they lack a certain realism and level of nuance. Unfortunately, even of all the best libraries, there's some instruments that are not so good, certain articulations that don't work, certain range that are better than others, certain dynamics that are better than others. So there's really this kind of thing that sometimes you have to hide VST instruments to avoid listener to identify too easily that it's VST libraries. Another big thing on my cons list is that it's very difficult to fake rubato, change of articulations, breathing. Like real performers on wind instruments, they breathe a lot. They breathe between the lines. They have to breathe at some point, right? But it's often very hard to do. It takes a lot of time to program with VST libraries. And with all the constraints of every VST libraries, it's sometimes impossible to get the perfect sound. So that's my next point. It's very time consuming. Of course, the more time you spend on it, usually the better it's gonna get, but sometimes you just work with a certain library and it's a dead end. You cannot get the result that you have in your head. Sometimes you even have to combine two different libraries, one for certain articulation and the other one for the other articulation. Sometimes to combine them together to have the attack of a certain library and then the resonance of the other library. It's really crazy the amount of time you can spend on this. And even though sound libraries are good for deadlines, to get to perfection, you need quite a lot of time. So how do we make the most out of this? We'll get into this in a few seconds, because this last point on my cons list for VST libraries is that although you can put any reverb on your VST libraries, there's a mix limitation. Because once you start adding, let's say, a horn for a certain library, and then a solo violin from this other library, and then a bass for this other library, all of these instruments were not recorded in the same room, same microphone placement, same engineer. It's totally different production, everything is different. So how do we blend these together? Well, there are ways to do this, but it's quite complex. But the general idea is to have all of these instruments with no reverb at all, the driest that you can have from these different sample libraries, and to have a common reverb to put them in a room together. But even then, they might need some adjustments into the levels of the different instruments, so it's just sometimes very complex to blend together. Well, now that we've gone through this whole pros and cons list for VST libraries versus real performers, real instruments, you see that there's problems with both of these options. So what should you go for in your music? And it always depends on, first, your budget. Of course, budget is important. Do you want to invest right now for something that you'll be using for 10 years? Do you want to invest into a specific opportunity to have real sounding instruments to impress for your demo or a certain producer? What you want to invest is very important. I've participated in some project that the composers were basically paying real musicians out of their pockets because they knew this opportunity would be a big recognition for them and a good way to convince future producers that hiring real performers takes money and it creates an amazing outcome. But let's say, what if you don't need to hire any real musicians at all to get a professional result? Well, it all depends on the second thing I want to talk about, and it's about your music. What is your music about? Is it very much centered on instrumental writing, or is it like 90% electronic sounds and you got this 10% that's allowed for, let's say, live instruments? If you're really much on that side of sound designing, mixing, producing, you can hide the VST library sounds that are imperfect behind your electronic sounds or within your electronic sounds. And sometimes you can really push it forward a lot. And let's say your solo violin or solo flute is 80% real, but this 20% that is feel unrealistic if you listen to it as solo, it might not feel so bad just because you have the electronics around hiding it. Now, on the other side, if you're a very instrumental writing composer and you're writing some big orchestral music that you don't have no money to hire real performers for this, well, sometimes even if you invest in the best sample libraries, it might not sound super realistic, but there are examples of unrealistic orchestral sounds that are very lucrative out there, especially for AAA games like video games, for trailers like big movie trailers. These are not real orchestras, they're just these big explosive VST sound libraries that are doubled with tons of percussions and other stuff. And this is a great example as to my main point here. If you're writing very much instrumental music, consider getting into sound design a little bit more and consider investing only a limited amount of money for real performers, for the important parts. If you have a very technical violin part in your music or something that you really want to put forward, maybe you can just hire this one violinist. And this way you have the reference of the orchestra, and in the middle you have your violin sound that's very realistic, that's very human, and you just push it in the front of the mix to attract the attention of the listeners. Now, the last advice I might have for you, if you just like working with electronic sound design and you want to add a little bit of personality to your music with real instruments, real sounds that have been recorded. Well, let's say you learned the guitar when you were a teenager. Well, then buy a cello. Learn how to bow a few notes. Buy a banjo, buy a mandolin, buy every string instrument that you know, and start writing music that's a little bit simpler to perform. If we take the cello, for example, if you just learn to put a note and then use the bow to do a little bit rhythmic pattern, this can just be the way for you to involve real performances in your music. And you can even hide your band live performance by adding sound design to it, adding distortion to the sound, transposing the sound. This way you create something that's much more original, that's accessible, that doesn't cost you tons of money. You don't need the biggest cello that there is. You can sometimes just start with a broken cello and it might give you what you need, an untuned guitar or whatever. Think about this for your future. What could you invest in and what can you record yourself? I think this is a great way to save money and to add personality to your music. Now, thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed this pros and cons list and these little tips that I gave you. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you want to learn more about film scoring, orchestration, composition, and please consider supporting the channel even more by becoming a member. Becoming a member really helps me to grow as a channel and to help me continue to deliver great content for you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.